The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of sand and rock that had swallowed countless armies throughout history. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, his face painted with camouflage, sweat mixing with the desert dust. Around him, 38 of the Navy's most elite warriors prepared for what should have been a routine extraction mission. The intelligence had seemed solid. A high-value terrorist leader was hiding in a remote compound deep in hostile territory. The SEALs had been inserted under cover of darkness, their helicopters disappearing into the night like ghosts. The plan was simple: get in, capture or eliminate the target, and extract before dawn. Morrison had run similar operations dozens of times. This one felt different from the moment they touched ground. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills, its mud brick walls looking ancient in the pale moonlight. As Morrison's team moved closer, something felt wrong. The silence was too perfect, too complete. Even the insects seemed to be holding their breath. Through his night vision goggles, everything appeared green and otherworldly, but there were no signs of the usual activity around such hideouts. Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, whispered into his radio. "Base, this is Alpha Team. We're at the target location. Something doesn't feel right here." His voice was barely audible, even to the men crouched just feet away from him. Years of training had taught them that in hostile territory, even the wind could carry secrets to enemy ears. Morrison made the decision to proceed. Intelligence suggested the target would be moving at dawn, and they couldn't afford to lose this opportunity. The terrorist leader they were hunting had been responsible for attacks that killed hundreds of innocent civilians. This mission wasn't just about military objectives. It was about justice. The SEALs moved like shadows across the desert floor, each man knowing exactly where his teammates were without needing to look. They had trained together for years, becoming more than a unit. They were brothers who could read each other's thoughts. Sergeant Williams took point, his rifle scanning for threats as he led them toward the compound's outer wall. As they approached the target building, Morrison felt his unease growing stronger. The compound was too quiet, too empty. Where were the guards? Where were the usual sounds of people moving around, cooking, talking? Even terrorist hideouts had normal human activity. This place felt like a tomb. The breach went perfectly. Williams planted the explosive charges with surgical precision, and the wall crumbled silently. The team flowed through the opening like water, each man covering his assigned sector. They moved through empty rooms, finding evidence that people had been there recently. Warm tea glasses, food that wasn't quite cold, sleeping areas that still held body heat. Then they found the room they had come for. It was empty except for a single table with papers scattered across it. Morrison felt his blood run cold as he examined the documents. They were written in Arabic, but he didn't need a translator to understand what he was looking at. Maps of the surrounding area. Photos of American helicopter landing zones, and worst of all, detailed information about their mission that should have been known only to the highest levels of command. "Sir," Rodriguez whispered urgently, "we need to get out of here. Now." Morrison was already moving, his mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just a failed mission, it was a trap. Someone had leaked their operational details, and they had walked directly into an ambush. The terrorist leader had never been here. Instead, they had been lured into a killing ground, where enemy forces could surround them completely. The first shots rang out just as Morrison's team reached the compound's exit. The sound echoed off the surrounding hills like thunder, and suddenly the night erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness from every direction. The hills, the nearby buildings, even from positions they had passed during their approach. The enemy had been waiting, hidden and patient, for exactly this moment. "Contact! Contact!" Williams shouted into his radio. "We have heavy fire from multiple positions. They're everywhere." Morrison dove behind a concrete barrier as bullets sparked off the walls around him. Through the chaos, he could see his men taking cover wherever they could find it. Some were behind vehicles, others pressed against walls, all of them returning fire with the precision that had made them legends. But precision wouldn't save them from this. They were outnumbered at least 10 to 1, possibly more. Rodriguez was frantically working his radio, trying to reach their extraction team. "Base, this is Alpha Team. We are under heavy fire and need immediate extraction. We are surrounded and taking casualties." The response that came back made Morrison's heart sink even further. "Alpha Team, this is Base. Negative on extraction. The landing zones are compromised. Enemy has anti-aircraft weapons positioned around your location. We cannot get birds in the air." Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him like a physical force. 38 men were depending on him to get them home alive, and their escape route had just been cut off. They were trapped in hostile territory with limited ammunition, no air support, and an unknown number of enemy fighters closing in on their position. The gunfire was intensifying by the minute. Morrison could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the deeper boom of larger weapons. Rocket-propelled grenades began exploding around their position, sending chunks of concrete and metal flying through the air. The enemy wasn't just trying to kill them. They were trying to capture them alive for propaganda purposes. "Count off!" Morrison shouted over the noise. Each of his men responded in turn, confirming they were still alive and fighting. Miraculously, they had taken only minor casualties so far, but Morrison knew their luck wouldn't hold. They needed to move, to find a more defensible position, but everywhere he looked, he saw muzzle flashes and the shadows of enemy fighters. Sergeant Chen, their explosives expert, crawled over to Morrison's position. "Sir, I count at least 60 hostiles, probably more. They've got us boxed in completely. What's the plan?" Morrison looked around at his men, these warriors who had followed him into hell without question. They deserved better than to die in this forgotten corner of the world, victims of someone else's betrayal. He keyed his radio one more time, knowing that their communications were probably being monitored, but not caring anymore. Any station, this is Alpha Team. 38 Navy SEALs are surrounded and under heavy fire. We need immediate air support. Our position is being overrun." As if in response to his call, the enemy fire suddenly doubled in intensity. Morrison realized they had been holding back, testing the SEALs' capabilities. Now they were bringing everything they had to bear on the trapped Americans. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of gunfire and explosions that made communication almost impossible. In the distance, Morrison could see vehicles approaching, trucks and jeeps filled with more fighters. The enemy was bringing in reinforcements, preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm the SEALs' position completely. Morrison checked his watch. Dawn was still hours away, and they were already running low on ammunition. He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his wife and children back home, wondering if he would ever see them again. When he opened them, he saw his men still fighting with everything they had, still believing that somehow, someway, they would find a way out of this nightmare. Morrison didn't know it yet, but hundreds of miles away, a young Air Force pilot was already climbing into her aircraft, determined to prove that no American warrior would be abandoned on her watch. The cavalry was coming, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez had been flying combat missions for 6 years, but she had never heard desperation like what came through her radio that morning. She was sitting in the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt de Seine, call sign Warthog 27, at a forward operating base when the emergency transmission crackled through the communications system. Any station, this is Alpha Team. 38 Navy SEALs are surrounded and under heavy fire. We need immediate air support. Our position is being overrun." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had worked with Navy SEALs before and knew they didn't call for help unless the situation was truly desperate. These were men who could fight their way out of almost anything. If they were asking for help, it meant they were facing impossible odds. She immediately contacted the base operations center. "Tower, this is Warthog 27. I'm hearing emergency traffic from a SEAL team under fire. Request permission to provide close air support." The response came back quickly, but it wasn't what she wanted to hear. "Negative, Warthog 27. That area is outside your assigned patrol zone. Command has determined it's too dangerous. Enemy has mobile SAM sites in that region. You are ordered to maintain current position." Sarah stared at her instruments, feeling anger and frustration building inside her chest. Somewhere out there, American warriors were dying while she sat safely on the ground, prevented from helping by bureaucratic red tape. She thought about her father, a Marine who had served in Vietnam. He had always told her that you never leave a fellow warrior behind, no matter what the cost. The radio crackled again with Morrison's voice, weaker now, more strained. "Any aircraft in the area, this is Alpha Team. We are taking heavy casualties. Enemy is closing in. We need help now." Sarah could hear the gunfire in the background of the transmission, a continuous roar that told her the SEALs were fighting for their lives. She closed her eyes and made a decision that would either save 38 men or end her military career forever. "Tower, this is Warthog 27. I'm experiencing radio difficulties. Cannot maintain station." Before the tower could respond, Sarah switched off her radio and began her engine startup sequence. The massive GAU-8 cannon, mounted in the nose of her aircraft, was loaded with 30mm depleted uranium rounds capable of destroying tanks. If the SEALs needed help, she would give them everything she had. The A-10 was built for exactly this kind of mission. Known as the Tank Buster, it was designed to provide close air support to ground troops in the most dangerous situations. Its titanium armor could withstand significant damage, and its twin engines were positioned to keep flying even if one was destroyed. Sarah had trained her entire career for moments like this. As she taxied toward the runway, Sarah's crew chief ran alongside her aircraft, shouting something she couldn't hear over the engine noise. She gave him a thumbs up and continued rolling. There was no time to explain, no time to get official permission. Every second she waited was another second that good men might be dying. The takeoff was perfect. The familiar weight of the heavily armed aircraft lifting smoothly into the pre-dawn sky. Sarah immediately turned toward the coordinates she had memorized from the SEAL team's transmission. According to her navigation system, they were over 200 miles away, far outside her authorized patrol area, deep in territory controlled by hostile forces. She pushed the throttles forward, coaxing every bit of speed she could from the aircraft. The A-10 wasn't built for speed, but it was built for determination. And right now, determination was exactly what 38 trapped SEALs needed. As she flew through the darkness, Sarah tried to raise the SEAL team on her radio. "Alpha Team, this is Warthog 27. Air support is en route to your position. Hold tight, we're coming." Morrison's voice came back immediately, filled with relief and disbelief. "Warthog 27, thank God. We are surrounded by at least 200 hostiles with vehicles and heavy weapons. They have us pinned down in a compound. We're running low on ammunition. Alpha Team, I need you to mark your position with infrared strobes. I'm coming in hot, and I need to know where the good guys are." Sarah could see the glow of the battle from 50 miles away. Muzzle flashes and explosions lighting up the horizon like a deadly fireworks show. As she got closer, she could make out the details through her night vision system. The compound where the SEALs were trapped was completely surrounded by enemy vehicles and fighters. It looked like an ancient fort under siege. She switched to her targeting system and immediately identified multiple enemy positions. Trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, mortar teams in the hills, groups of fighters moving to flanking positions. The SEALs were trapped in the center of it all, their position marked by tiny infrared strobes that showed up like beacons in her night vision. Alpha Team, this is Warthog 2-7. I have visual on your position. Keep your heads down, I'm coming in for gun runs. Sarah rolled her aircraft into a steep dive, the desert floor rushing up toward her at tremendous speed. The A-10's cannon was one of the most devastating close support weapons ever built, capable of firing 70 rounds per second. Each round was the size of a small bottle, and when they hit their target, the effect was devastating. She lined up her first pass on a group of enemy vehicles positioned on the north side of the compound. The targeting computer locked on, and Sarah squeezed the trigger. The aircraft shook as the massive cannon fired, sending a stream of depleted uranium rounds into the enemy position. She watched through her targeting pod as the vehicles exploded in brilliant flashes, their ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions. "Good hits! Good hits!" Morrison's voice came over the radio. "You got them! Enemy fire from the north has stopped!" But Sarah could see more targets already moving to replace the ones she had destroyed. The enemy had prepared for air attacks and had spread their forces across a wide area. She would have to make multiple passes to break up their assault, and each pass would expose her to ground fire. She climbed back up to altitude and rolled in for another attack, this time targeting a mortar position in the hills. The enemy was ready for her now, and she could see tracer rounds reaching up toward her aircraft like deadly streamers. Something hit her left engine, and warning lights immediately began flashing in her cockpit. Sarah felt the aircraft shudder and lose power, but she completed her attack run anyway. The mortar position disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. She pulled up hard, checking her instruments. The left engine was damaged but still running. She could make it home, but only if she left immediately. Instead, she turned back toward the battlefield. Through her radio, she could hear the intensity of the ground battle increasing. The enemy was launching their final assault, throwing everything they had at the surrounded SEALs. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from hundreds of weapons, all focused on the small compound where Morrison's men were making their last stand. She keyed her radio one more time. "Alpha Team, I'm coming back around. Mark any targets you can identify." "Warthog 2-7, you need to get out of here," Morrison replied. "We can see you're hit. Don't risk it for us." Sarah smiled grimly as she rolled into another dive. "Negative, Alpha Team. Nobody gets left behind. Not on my watch." This time, the enemy fire was even heavier. They had repositioned their anti-aircraft weapons and were waiting for her return. Sarah could see the bright flashes of missiles being launched in her direction, but she held her course steady, focusing on the enemy position that was closest to overrunning the SEAL compound. The cannon thundered again, and another group of enemy fighters disappeared in explosions and smoke. But this time, Sarah felt something slam into her aircraft with tremendous force. Alarms began screaming in her cockpit, and she could smell smoke. Her right engine was on fire, and her hydraulic systems were failing. The A-10 was living up to its reputation for toughness, continuing to fly even with massive damage, but Sarah knew she wouldn't be able to make many more passes. She had to make each one count. Below her, she could see that her attacks had broken the back of the enemy assault. Vehicles were burning, and the coordinated attack was falling apart into chaos. Morrison's voice came over the radio, filled with emotion. "Warthog 2-7, you saved our lives. Enemy is falling back. We can hold until extraction arrives." Sarah tried to respond, but her radio was damaged. She turned her wounded aircraft back toward base, trailing smoke and fighting to keep control. She had broken direct orders and risked everything to save 38 men she had never met. As she flew through the dawn sky, she wondered if it had been worth it. Looking back at the battlefield, where the SEALs were already being extracted by helicopters that had finally been cleared to enter the area, she knew the answer was yes. The emergency landing was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Her A-10 was barely controllable, with one engine completely dead and the other running on fumes. Hydraulic fluid was streaming from multiple holes in the fuselage, and several of her flight control surfaces were damaged beyond repair. The aircraft that had carried her into battle was now fighting to stay in the air long enough to get her home. She could see the runway at the forward operating base growing larger in her windscreen, but she was coming in too fast and at too steep an angle. The damaged aircraft wasn't responding to her inputs the way it should, and she realized there was a good chance she wouldn't survive the landing. After everything she had been through, after saving 38 men, it would be ironic if she died in a landing accident just miles from safety. The tower controller's voice crackled through her damaged radio system. "Warthog 2-7, you are cleared for emergency landing. Fire trucks are standing by." Sarah didn't bother to respond. All of her attention was focused on bringing the wounded aircraft down safely. She could see emergency vehicles racing along the runway, their lights flashing in the early morning sunlight. In a few moments, she would either walk away from this landing or become another casualty of war. The A-10 hit the runway hard, bouncing twice before the landing gear took hold. Sarah immediately deployed the drag chute and applied maximum braking, but the aircraft was still moving too fast. She could see the end of the runway approaching rapidly, and beyond it was a concrete barrier that would destroy the aircraft completely. At the last possible second, the A-10 finally came to a stop, just yards from disaster. Sarah sat in the cockpit for a long moment, her hands shaking from adrenaline, hardly believing she had made it back alive. Through her canopy, she could see fire trucks and ambulances surrounding her aircraft, emergency personnel already spraying foam on her smoking engines. As she climbed out of the cockpit, Sarah was surprised to see a large crowd gathered near the runway. Ground crews, maintenance personnel, and off-duty pilots had all come out to witness her return. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire crowd was applauding. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. But her celebration was short-lived. Within minutes, a military police vehicle arrived, and two stern-faced officers approached her. "Captain Martinez, you need to come with us. The base commander wants to see you immediately." Sarah nodded, knowing this moment had been inevitable. She had disobeyed direct orders and endangered military equipment. Even though her actions had saved 38 lives, she had broken the chain of command and could face serious consequences. As she was escorted to the base headquarters, she wondered if she would be court-martialed or simply discharged from the Air Force. Colonel Peterson was waiting for her in his office, his expression unreadable. He was a veteran pilot himself, with over 30 years of service and multiple combat tours. Sarah had always respected him as a fair commander, but she also knew he was a stickler for following orders and maintaining discipline. "Sit down, Captain," he said without looking up from the paperwork on his desk. "Do you have any idea what kind of situation you've created?" Sarah straightened in her chair. "Yes, sir. I violated direct orders and left my assigned patrol area without authorization. I'm prepared to accept the consequences." Colonel Peterson finally looked up at her, and Sarah was surprised to see something that looked almost like admiration in his eyes. "The consequences? Captain, do you realize what you've done? You single-handedly saved 38 Navy SEALs from certain death or capture. You broke up an enemy force of over 200 fighters. You prevented what would have been the worst loss of special operations personnel in decades." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. "Sir, I understand that, but I still disobeyed orders." The colonel stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the flight line where Sarah's damaged A-10 was being examined by maintenance crews. "Captain, I've been flying military aircraft for over 30 years. I've seen pilots who follow every order perfectly, but lack the courage to do what's right when it really matters. And I've seen pilots who understand that sometimes the most important orders come from your conscience, not from a radio." He turned back to face her. "What you did out there was exactly what military aviation is supposed to be about. Close air support isn't just a mission. It's a sacred trust between pilots and ground forces. You honored that trust, even when it meant risking everything. Sarah felt relief washing over her, but she was still confused. What happens now, sir? Colonel Peterson smiled for the first time since she had entered his office. Now you're going to be recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The SEAL Team Commander has already submitted a citation describing your actions as the most heroic close air support mission he's witnessed in 20 years of service. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the office door. "Come in," the colonel called. The door opened to reveal Lieutenant Commander Morrison, still wearing his desert camouflage uniform, his face marked with exhaustion and gratitude. Behind him stood several other members of his SEAL team, all of them looking like they had been through hell and back. Morrison stepped forward and extended his hand to Sarah. "Captain Martinez, I'm Jake Morrison. I can't begin to thank you for what you did out there. You saved every one of my men." Sarah shook his hand, feeling overwhelmed by the moment. "I just did my job, Commander. Any pilot would have done the same thing." Morrison shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am. Any pilot would have followed orders and stayed away from that fight. You chose to risk everything to save us. That's not just doing your job. That's being a hero." One by one, each of the SEALs stepped forward to shake her hand and thank her personally. Sergeant Williams, who had been wounded in the final enemy assault, told her that her first gun run had arrived just as the enemy was about to overrun their position. Rodriguez, the communications specialist, said her intervention had given them the breathing room they needed to organize their defense until extraction arrived. As the SEALs left the colonel's office, Morrison turned back to Sarah one more time. "Captain, if you ever need anything at all, you just call. Every man in my unit owes you his life, and we don't forget that kind of debt." Later that evening, Sarah sat in her quarters, still processing everything that had happened. Her aircraft had been damaged beyond repair, but that seemed like a small price to pay for 38 lives. She thought about her father and wondered what he would say about her decision to break orders. She realized he would probably tell her that some orders were meant to be broken when American lives were on the line. The next morning brought more surprises. Sarah was called to a briefing room where she found not only Colonel Peterson, but also a general she had never seen before, along with several other high-ranking officers. The general stood as she entered the room. "Captain Martinez, I'm General Harrison from Pentagon. I flew here specifically to meet you and to personally thank you for your actions yesterday." The general went on to explain that her rescue mission had been studied by military analysts and was already being used as a case study in close air support tactics. More importantly, her willingness to break rules to save lives had sparked a review of engagement protocols that might prevent similar situations in the future. "Captain," the general continued, "you've been selected for promotion to major, effective immediately. You're also being transferred to a new position at the Air Force Weapons School, where you'll help train the next generation of close air support pilots." Sarah felt honored, but also somewhat overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir. I just hope that other pilots never have to face the choice I faced yesterday." General Harrison nodded seriously. "That's exactly why we need officers like you in training positions. You understand that sometimes the most important decisions aren't found in manuals or regulations. They're found in the heart of a warrior who refuses to abandon fellow Americans in their time of greatest need." 6 months later, Major Sarah Martinez stood before a classroom of young Air Force pilots, teaching them about close air support techniques and the responsibilities that came with flying armed aircraft. On the wall behind her desk was a photo of 38 Navy SEALs standing in front of an American flag, each of them smiling broadly. At the bottom of the photo was a simple inscription, "To Phoenix, with eternal gratitude from Alpha Team." Every day, Sarah looked at that photo and remembered the lesson her father had taught her years earlier. You never leave a fellow warrior behind, no matter what the cost. It was a lesson she now passed on to every pilot who sat in her classroom, knowing that someday, somewhere, one of them might face the same impossible choice she had faced over the desert that morning. The story of Captain Sarah Phoenix Martinez and the 38 Navy SEALs became legend in military circles, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come not from following orders, but from having the courage to do what's right when everything is on the line. Her actions proved that in the brotherhood of arms, rank, and service branch matter less than the sacred bond between warriors who refuse to let their comrades fight alone.